My name is quite embarrassing because my name is Elizabeth Pisani, which is a name that comes from the south of Italy via my grandfather, but he emigrated to the United States, as did my grandmother, who came from Sicily, and now I speak almost no Italian, so I have to say hello to my Italian readers through a book that was translated by someone else, not written in Italian by me. I'm ashamed of that, but I gather that the translation is spectacular, and it speaks of a spectacular country, and I hope that you enjoy discovering it. It's always been a mystery to me and a source of great frustration that this country that is home to 1 in 30 people on the planet, it's the 4th most populous in the world, it's extraordinary in its diversity, in its riches both in terms of what's in the ground and what's above the ground, is basically the biggest invisible thing on earth. So, you know, why should we care about it if it's so invisible? And I think the first question to ask yourself is, well, why is it so invisible? And one of the reasons I think that it's so invisible is because it's actually a remarkable and completely unexpected success story. So you haven't heard much about Indonesia because Indonesia works. So it's the home to more Muslims than any other, it's the biggest Muslim majority nation, but we don't have civil wars of any great magnitude, we don't have meltdowns, it's a democracy, it functions. So one of the reasons it's invisible is because it works. And that's also a reason, in my mind, to be much more interested about it. It's really an example of being able to bring together a huge number of really varied cultures and make them work as a nation. And there aren't that many examples in the world that do that so well. Indonesia is a really interesting example of a country that has an overwhelming majority, so roughly 90%, just under 90% of the population is Muslim, but there are many other significant religious minorities. But it also has this huge ethnic mix. And I think that what we can learn is that you actually can live together perfectly happily if you play to one another's strengths. And I think Indonesians do that quite well. So it's quite funny when you're sitting around with a bunch of Indonesians. So I was very recently in Indonesia with a young friend, 18 years old, never traveled widely before, doesn't speak any Indonesian. And we're sitting around on boats for 3 and 4 days at a time, and so I'm trying to include him in the conversation and translate what's going on. And it makes me really aware how much of the conversation is about where are you from, where am I from, and making jokes about people's ethnic groups and whatever. And in a way, when I translate it, it seems quite shocking. You'd never say that about another ethnic group in the UK, for example. But Indonesians wear it very lightly, and for some reason not trying to pretend there's no differences. There are many differences between us, religious, in terms of levels of education, in terms of ethnicity, language, and yet by not trying to hide that, by embracing that diversity, joking about it, talking about it, it seems to work much better than in societies where we've decided to pretend we're all the same. When in fact, the very real facts, as is now becoming politically very obvious, is that we're not the same. But unless we are explicit about our differences, it's very difficult to do anything about those differences and to create a level playing field. So I think Indonesia, in a way, teaches us to be more open about our differences, perhaps. So for me, what's really interesting about this, so we've got, I don't know what order to put them in. So you put them in the order of roots at the bottom, then fires, then identity, right? in Indonesia, they're all very, very much mixed up. So I'd have to put them next to one another in a way, because the fire is in two senses in the Indonesian context. It's the root, in a way, of Indonesia's wealth. So Indonesia is, some people call it the Ring of Fire, actually. It's 148 active volcanoes in this big kind of sweeping arc that creates this incredibly fertile country, which means that we've got this wonderful, wonderful richness of the soil. That makes for great population density, which also means that you've got this strange issue of people's identity. The more people you have squished into small amounts of land, as you do in Java, the more people want to assert their particular local identities. So within a certain population, you have people who are almost going back to older roots of different cultures to try and assert particular cultural identities. So I used to think that 7% of Indonesia is one island, Java, and that has 60% of the national population. And I used to think, oh, Java, it's all Java, Javanese, they're all the same. Oh, so not true. So you've got the West Java is completely different from Central and East Java, but even within Central Java, which is very, very culturally homogenous to an outsider, everyone's now saying, oh, but you people from Solo are not like you people from Banyuwangi. People are going back to recipes, people are going back to language roots, people are going back to express their locality. And I think that that's happening because in an increasingly globalized world, your particular personal roots become more important. And for me, what's interesting about Indonesia is that they're managing somehow to strike a very good balance between the local rootedness and this globalization. So there's a national language which everyone speaks, but more and more the pride in local languages is resurgent, and people are more and more now writing both novels and poetry in their local languages. It doesn't detract from the national identity and the national language, but it means that people feel a sense of pride in their place as well as in their nation. I think that's probably a good thing. So at the end of the book, so the book is based on 25 years of a troubled relationship with Indonesia, but also a 13-month journey all in one go. That was, 48,000 kilometers, more than half of it by bus, horse, boat, whatever. And I came to the conclusion, and I think I said this at the end of the book, that this is a country that you will never be able to pin down. It's not, Indonesia is a spectacularly diverse country in terms of its ecology. So it's got all these wonderful rainforests, and it's got fantastic coral reefs, and so it's been a great place for collectors over the years. And a very famous collector for the British is Alfred Russel Wallace, who is credited with actually coming up with Darwinism before Darwin did, by some people. And he ran around Indonesia for 12 years collecting beetles. And he got all these beautiful beetles with their beautiful shiny carapaces, and then he pinned them to a board and gave them a label, a name, all of these species. And after 25 years and just 12 months of very intense travel around the place, many of the places he traveled, I thought, this is a country that you can't pin to a board and give a name to. It's always going to be moving, it's always going to be evolving, it's always, even at one time, it's living in almost different centuries at the same time. So there are, for every chapter that I've written in that book, there are 100 more chapters that will be written, probably not by me, probably by other people, but it's a country that rewards exploration until the end of time, I think.